remind members who are wearing face masks that when you're speaking, please speak up and please remove your mask when you are speaking so that you can be heard. Thank you. The first item on our agenda are declarations of interest. Do I have any, please? Councillor Williams.
Please can I declare an interest in agenda item number 10, planning application for the Mighty Empire.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations of interest, please? Councillor Roger.
Number, but I declare an interest in the agenda item concerning the Cultural Museum, as I'm Director of the Islands Partnership. It's non-pecuniary, so I won't leave the room, but I won't vote.
Thank you very much. Any others, please? Thank you. Item 2 on our agenda are the minutes of our previous meeting. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, I'd like to put it on page 6 where it says resolved at the top. I have spoken to the monitoring officer about this. He says that this could be changed if the members agree with it. So I'd like to propose suitable wording to reflect the members' discussion and the work that the strategic director to bring to the DPP in terms of an options analysis. What I would propose is that it reads that endorsement be given in principle that a joint health and wellbeing board for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly be established, with a further report to be brought to full council, subject to comprehensive options analysis being brought to DPP with the proposed terms of reference following engagement with both boards, all members and officers. I'd like to propose that.
Thank you. Is there a second for that amendment, please? Councillor Marcus.
May I ask a question, please, Chair? May I ask Mr. Thomas what was actually voted through at the meeting? The wording, the precise wording, because my understanding is we vote for what we actually said and then address in other areas whether or not we actually meant to insert something with the Thomas. Mr. Thomas?
It was added. Checked the recording. I don't believe an amendment was made to respect that. So obviously you can do this with the council.
Okay, so I have a proposal and second Mark. All those in favour of amending this, please. I think that's carried. Thank you. Thank you. So, are there any other issues regarding the minutes? Councillor Fraser.
Small one. The attendees there, not only is this but the agenda's protected new councillors. Sorry. The new councillors are left out of the attendees. We're all mentioned within minutes, but I've noticed that a couple of times now.
Any other issues regarding these minutes, please? Could I have a proposer for the adoption of these minutes? Councillor Mumford, and a seconder, please. Councillor Lane. All those in favour? Very much. Item 3 on our agenda is Chairman's announcements. I have none. Item 4 on the agenda are questions under Standing Order 14. I have none. Item 5 on our agenda are to consider the reports from committees. We've had 2 committees with draft minutes for information on the IFCA and the Local Outbreak Mitigation Board. Councillor Watt, do you have anything to say about the IFCA?
Second Chairman, just one one correction. I forget where the next paragraph is. It mentions an amendment approved by the MMO. It actually should be DEFRA, but I'll correct that as the next committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We will address that as we get to these and amend them. Thank you. It can't be done at this small council, which is only a review. I realise that. Thank you very much. And just from the, I was the chair of the local outbreak engagement board and had a very good report from our director of public health, among others. It's really just to remind everybody that we are still a COVID enhanced response area, and therefore we should still apply caution all the time with regard to COVID, and make sure that we're doing all the things that we know that we should be doing, and trying to make sure that our residents and public are being careful as well. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions regarding the IFCA or the local outbreak engagement board? No, thank you. So we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is to consider motions in accordance with Standing Order 12. I have none. Item 7 on our agenda, urgent items. I have none. So we move on to part 1 now, and the first item on that agenda, item 8, is planning application for land at Lawrence and Browse Martins. Could I ask Councillor Dugan to leave the room for a moment? Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. It's in your hands.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is brought to members for a decision as the proposal is for the retention of a converted small agricultural building to a dwelling, and on the basis that the applicant is a councillor of this authority. A note of correction, the report references policy SS4 when referring to the reuse of existing buildings policy. This should read policy SS3 in paragraphs 16, 17 and 19. Elsewhere in the report it is actually referenced correctly. So this application is to retain an already converted agricultural building and the siting of ancillary structures on the land as a means to provide seasonal accommodation to support the applicant's existing organic vegetable growing business. Key policies in this case are policies LC4, staff accommodation, and policy SS3, that's the reuse of existing buildings. Both policies expect applications to be accompanied by an appraisal demonstrating that there is a functional and operational need for the proposed accommodation that cannot be met by existing suitable accommodation available in the area, and that the accommodation is of the size and type appropriate to that functional and operational need of the business or organisation. As members will note, the application is recommended for refusal on the basis that no clear appraisal, such as a business plan, to comply with the policy requirements has been provided. Members will note that a refusal requires the unauthorised development to be followed up with an enforcement notice. Both the refusal of planning permission and any enforcement notice can be subject to an appeal. Members are reminded that they could consider a deferral of this application as an alternative to the recommendation of the report to enable the applicant time to put forward information required to assess the need for seasonal staff accommodation. Members will be aware that they can also consider a motion to approve the application, but it's recommended that a clear explanation as to the rebalancing of which of the issues has led to conclusion that the benefits of retaining the development outweigh the policy conflict and harm identified. It's also recommended that if members are minded to approve, that this should be limited to a temporary period for seasonal use by persons employed by the applicant only, to ensure that if the business ceases or any proposed expansion as intended fails to be realised, the building and land is reverted back to agricultural use. The information provided for consideration did not clearly justify why seasonal dwelling was required to support the applicant's business. The information was identified as necessary in this case, as the business needs are not self-evident. The local planning authority recognised that staff accommodation for businesses is problematic, but to support an application to meet the needs of a business where the functional and operational needs of that business have not clearly been set out, has resulted in an isolated form of development for which the benefits has not been evidenced to conclude the key policy requirements should be set aside and the development approved, and the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
These reports, there's two main reasons for the decision that she's come to, refusal. One is the lack of business justification in the public domain for the development, and that the application, like the previous application in 2017, does not preserve or enhance the conservation area. These two explain the other areas where the application does comply with policy, i.e. flood risk, historic environment, etc. But in my opinion, the two areas where the application fails are of sufficient severity to refuse the application. Therefore, I propose the recommendations laid out in the report, but I ask the Chairman that there be a debate from other members be allowed to.
Thank you very much, Councillor Marcus. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Marcus, and I would like to second that proposal. I think it turned down in 2017, and I don't think anything's changed since then. Visual impact, flood risk, fire engine access. It's in a poor state at the moment. I wouldn't have thought that it would fit with human habitation. I don't think it's ever been a house before. I think it was built in the 1930s, but I don't think it's been a house. There was no windows before the window was put in where the front door is, and there's no chimney, which they would have had in those days. Particularly concerned about the water situation. They use bottled water, but how are they going to do a shower and washing? I would say it's a refusal.
Williams.
Yeah, I've got a little bit more sympathy, because I do agree with some of the comments raised. But in general, I don't see seasonal staff accommodation as an excuse to house people in cold, small, damp, dark, miserable conditions. I would prefer to see that at least an advice on this, whether we could defer and then use that time to put in place restrictions that only allow it to be used during the summer months. I'm concerned if a parent moves over to work on the farm, there could be a small child living there. And I'm very conscious of the sort of public health aspects of the importance of housing. So I would like to see, if we were able to defer it, restriction on occupancy, how many months a year could be used, and those would be impacted. But I don't disagree with what the council London did. It doesn't appear to me to be enough space to live. I'm conscious of people coming in on the campsite and camping and those sorts of people. I guess it is.
Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, as councillors, we look at the situation we have in front of us. I think the planning officer has given us a very good report, and I support both the recommendation for refusal. In fact, I would have been happy to second the refusal if Councillor Mumford had not so done. I would say that I see little mileage in deferral. Surely deferral would only be a reasonable course of action if we can see that in the short term the applicant could provide information that would make us change our minds or materially change the building or indeed the working arrangement we currently have. I would see in the short term no chance of making this building any more suitable for human occupation or indeed rapidly improving his business. I wish the applicant the best of luck with his new business, and if it should prosper, which I indeed hope it will, then I would suggest that he comes back as a result of that to ask us that he can build suitable accommodation for workers similar to that which Mr. Morton has so successfully done with his fish and chips. I would recommend that we refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Guard.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I couldn't go with Councillor Little on this one. It's very planning application for a different site for better housing for the staff.
Thank you very much. Councillor Roger.
Yeah, I'd like to concur with Councillor Grottick. I think the two key things here are that although we're talking later about this acute problem of staff accommodation for the tourism industry, in this particular instance there is a complete lack of evidence for its requirement. And I think the second most important thing is the quality. If we're going to provide staff accommodation on these islands, which we must do, it must be of a quality that we would expect ourselves to habitate, live in, and even our guests to live in. And I don't think this achieves that at all. And therefore I wouldn't be for deferral, because I think a brand new application is what's required here to completely look at the development with fresh eyes.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
This is a really interesting concept that these trying to create. I hate the point about it not being suitable, for long-term use. But it's trying to use a carbon zero approach, which we're all trying to look for. It's trying to use recyclable grey water supply, I believe, solar panels, and a compost loop. And we are looking at trying to be a carbon neutral environment. And I actually will credit to him to try and create something which is carbon neutral. However, I do have concerns about its whether it's suitable for habitat, and I would actually concur with Andrew about the refusal of
Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
As someone who arrived at these islands, fire attendant, fire not dissimilar accommodation. It is really the islands. And Councillor Williams, I feel if we could defer it. The fact the applicant hasn't put a decent business plan, seems to be away from actual planning. We could defer to give the applicant a chance to prepare a decent business plan and prove the requirement for it. And also, as you say, look at seasonal restrictions on it.
Councillor Dean.
So yeah, I suppose concur with Councillor Fraser. I think we all know anecdotal stories about people living in sheds and God knows what over here to work on the islands, and I think the restrictions like seasonal restrictions on it. I don't really see a problem with it. And to be honest, I think we're missing the point. We haven't got that seasonal worker accommodation over here. And I know it's not everyone in an ideal world. It will be fully insulated and tinted bricks and iron bars and the rest of it. But we haven't got that. We've got businesses that are struggling to boil and contain staff and go over to the so I honestly think we have to
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can hear the argument on both sides here, but I think deferment is actually a classic case of kicking the can down the road. And as for being zero carbon attempt to reaching zero carbon, I would query that supplying it with bottled water, because plastic bottles are far from being zero carbon. So I would not support a deferment. Any other councillor wishing to go? Councillor Legg.
Thank you. I think that the main planning reason for this is the lack of a business need for seasonal employment, and if that can be resolved through giving the applicant more time, then that is what we should look at. That is the most material planning consideration. So I think this is the way to go.
Any other councillors? Councillor Sims.
I'm inclined to agree with those who want a deferment. I'm also aware that I don't think that would be particularly useful for the applicant. I think we all agree it's not the best planning application we've ever seen, and it's problematic, and the business case is fundamentally not a business case. However, the applicant feels feels that he needs some staff accommodation, and presumably there is a basis for that. So I'm inclined to go with the others and with the deferment, just to establish the whys and wherefores of this more accurately.
I hear what the deferment. I hear the deferment, but I would also raise the issue that we are looking at a retrospective application from a member of this council, and I think deferring it gives the rest of our community reason to look at retrospective planning as we go through, and I think that would be the wrong message to send out to our community.
Also, like I say, that a rejection is not a refusal. The applicant will get another free go at the planning application. It's not a line in the sand. This isn't the end of this application. All the deferment does is push it down the line and say to the applicant, we're not quite sure, blah, blah, blah. We are quite sure because there is no business case. Regardless of what elsewhere in the public documents, the applicant has not made the business case for this application. It's not justified. And also there is the other issue, the other material planning issue of not being in enhancements or preserving the conservation area. So there are two issues to this. So therefore, I think rejection is the most suitable way forward for the council and for you.
So no other councillor wishes to come in at the moment. I have a proposer and a seconder for. Yeah, I'm going to say that. So at the moment we have a proposer and a seconder to refuse this application. Councillor Williams, following your comments or whatever, do you wish to make a counter proposal?
No, because we had it last week and still didn't have it now. No, I don't wish to make that.
So, could I please have a vote on the proposition that this application is refused, please? All those in favour of refusal? That's carried. Thank you. Would you like to, Councillor, do that?
This application defaults full council for a decision as the applicant is the serving councillor. This is an application for an enlarged and altered single-storey rear extension to this existing dwelling on Tresco. The property is used as a tourism accommodation, and the alterations and extension result in a reconfiguration of the space to provide improved kitchen and WC facilities on the ground floor. No harm has been identified, and the proposal is considered to be in keeping with the character and appearance of the area, sufficient to address the previous reasons for refusal. Subject to the conditions set out, it's considered that the proposal would deliver upgraded tourism accommodation that would make a positive contribution to the provision of high-quality, sustainable tourism on the island without significant adverse impacts and in accordance with the adopted local plan. The application is therefore considered acceptable, and pending a further back emergence survey is recommended for approval.
I think it's a perfect example of where the council has rejected the proposal and the applicant has gone away, done their homework and come back with a proposal which is much more fitting with the natural environment, the conservation area, and much less municipal in the south. And yeah, it's a really good job by the applicant, I think. So I propose the recommendation.
I'm happy to second it. I think it's a good application. I mean, it's just, Lisa's just said it's pending another BERT survey. There's that throw the whole thing out till next spring or summer?
No, they've done the back.
Oh, they've done it. Good. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Any other comments on this application? So we have a proposer and a seconder for approval. All those in favour? The last planning application, item 10, is for the Violet Church Road.
Thank you, Chair. This application also for council as the applicant is related to a serving councillor. So this is an application for alterations to doors and windows. The property is used as tourism accommodation and the alterations facilitate internal reconfiguration of the space to provide improved facilities on the ground floor. No harm has been identified and the proposal is considered to be in keeping with the character and appearance of the area. And subject to the conditions set out, it is considered that the proposal would deliver upgraded tourism accommodation that would make a positive contribution to sustainable tourism on the island without significant adverse impacts and in accordance with the adopted local plan. The application is therefore considered acceptable and recommended for approval.
I add to this application for one of the recommendations.
I'm happy to second that, and I've lived near the pilot for many years, and it's quite wondrous the amount of work he manages to do in that place over and over again. But anyway, I'm happy to second it.
Councillor Grottin.
I was just happy. Sorry, Chair. I was just happy to second the application.
Thank you, Councillor Roger.
It was nice to see some investment being made in the tourism accommodation.
Any other councillors wishing to come in, please? No, so we have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour? And the application is granted. Thank you. So we move on to item 11 on our agenda, which is our external audit 2021. And I'll leave you to Russell, please, our 151 officer, to start off with the duties.
Chair, I won't be long on this. We've completed the statutory accounts by the end of June, which I think I've reported to you previously. They were passed over to our external auditors, Grant Thornton, for them to start the audit work. And Paul Dossett here from Grant Thornton is here today to give you an update on progress to date. The outcome that we should be ready for full council in October with the final audit report and the sign-off of the statutory accounts.
Thank you very much, Russell. Yes, so this progress we presented plan to the July meeting. I think it's probably useful to give a bit of context, both nationally and locally. So nationally, the statutory deadlines have been moved around a bit in the last few years. One, because of government decisions. Two, COVID. And so MACLG had a policy this year of accounts being produced by the end of July. Council facility, the council produced by the start of that, with the statutory audit deadline of the end of September. Now, September the 21st, and I'm not aware of a single statutory audit that has been signed off today in the country, and that is a function of the regime we're currently living in, whereby there's a huge increase of audit work required, all audits, as a result of issues that have occurred in the audit profession around some of the high-profile businesses that have gone bust, such as Carillion, BHS, etc. And so the Financial Reporting Council, who regulate audit, has completely upped the requirements in audit of all types, principally in the company sector, and that the way that it works is it transports itself into the public sector, sometimes inappropriately in terms
particular, but just in general. So there's quite a lot of turnover of staff that need to train new people up because all of which takes time. If we come to the local situation at Cornwall, silly, we have received a good set of accounts from your finance function. We get excellent support, I have to say, from your finance team. Tracy and team, led by Russell, provide us with excellent support, which means that we are progressing well with your audit. I'm very pleased with the progress so far. There are no issues of concern today, and as I said, the amount of work required nowadays, you always probably expect to find something challenging, particularly in asset valuation areas. The Financial Reporting Council have a particular fondness for asset valuations and checking that they're all correct, and because they're largest numbers with a lot of it. So we spend a lot of time on your work there. You have the pension liability, which is also a considerable amount of work, although not that complicated to be honest, because it's a large number and it's an estimate by the Reporting Council. Take a particular pleasure in focusing on that. In addition to this, for this year, the National Audit Office has set a new code of practice. They do a code of practice for 5 years, and the National Audit Office were concerned that local authorities value for money work on local authorities wasn't really in the past, and that too many authorities sidelined the account. The new code of practice is much more extensive, and so we will have to do a piece of work for you around your financial sustainability. Obviously, it's something all councils reflect on, your governance arrangements, and your achievement of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Some of that is via benchmarking, which I know is quite a challenging area for you because you're unique in circumstances. We have to do that piece of work as well as part of this year's audit. The National Audit Office has decoupled the relationship between the accounts and that piece of work. So, as Russell said, we're aiming to close the accounts and sign the accounts for the RSM in October. The value for money piece of work has a deadline of the end of January. For this year, it's a 1 year only decoupling. What I would say though, however, is we have done some preliminary work on those areas, and we have not identified anything at this stage to bring to your attention as an area of significant weakness. What we're required to do is bring to your attention areas of significant weakness, and we make what's called key recommendations about those areas of significant weakness. Now, we haven't completed the full amount of work, but clearly some issues such as financial sustainability are a bit self-evident to some degree in councils, and at the moment we've got no issues of particular concern. So I think that's positive, and I think there's been a very positive trajectory actually for the council in the last few years. You may be aware that nationally there are lots of councils under lots of scrutiny for governance and financial sustainability issues. There's, in the last year alone, there's been 4 public interest reports issued. There's been quite a lot of statutory recommendations, which are a shorter form of public interest reports. We are issuing, I think, 2 next week at different councils. So I think, again, reflecting very well where you're at the moment, is that none of those issues apply to you. We're really pleased to see that last year we had a bit of a challenge in terms of completion of internal audit work during the 1920 year. We know that internal audit provided by Cornwall Council has completed the programme about work for you for the 2021 year, so that's not an issue anymore from our point of view. So overall, I'm very pleased to say that we're making good progress with good support from your team, and I think we're on trajectory to complete the audit in October. So
all, but you haven't had a great deal to tell us, really. I would have thought it would be more useful if your time and ours, if you'd come over to a November meeting when you had a little bit more pros at the moment, isn't it? I'm not saying you're not welcome. Please step in.
Sorry. It's a question. So in terms of around timing and visual plans, what I will say is, although we don't have a detailed report, we have completed large amounts of work, and I think I probably would just say you'll get a report which is quite long because it has to go through particular auditing standards and disclosures, etc. I would say that actually where we are at the moment, we've completed large elements of work and we have no findings of concern. So we really, what I'm anticipating here is that the final report might have 2 or 3 minor control points or just minor adjustments or disclosure points. Nothing of concern. So we're not, just for clarity, we're not a sort of, we're just started. We are considerably through the audit now. So that gives me the confidence to say that we're in a good position. But understand that.
I'm happy to enjoy it. I mean, in that context, if you had issues, you'd have been talking a lot longer, and I wouldn't have asked that question, would I? So I think I stand corrected. Okay, thank you.
So just in terms of the timing of that, so the accounts report will be available for October. I mentioned the value for money work, which we have to present is a requirement actually that we can't full council present the value for money work. The value for money work will be working towards that sort of January time frame. And one of the things that we will absolutely have to do as part of that work is on the economy efficiency of effectiveness. Clearly for a lot of councils, it is relatively straightforward to benchmark, say, one London borough against another, or one district council and county area against another. We know that that's not possible for obvious reasons. And so we will be reflecting the fact in our report about the sense, the cost analysis, and your own cost analysis about the provision of public services on the island, and all the things that relate to it being high cost. So that will absolutely be part of our reflection, because I'm sure you can give us data that might show you a higher cost than Council X, but it doesn't really mean anything in the light of the nature of your organisation and your island. So absolutely, we'll be reflecting those things, and obviously our report is a public report, so we're more than happy for that to be used appropriately in discussion with government. It's a very valid point because, and I think we see this quite a lot, that the formula used for funding of local government is a very ancient formula. Goes back to the 70s, and it's not really been modernised enough to take into account the changes in circumstances. So what you have is a scenario where inner London boroughs are funded as if it was still the 1970s in terms of levels of deprivation, etc., Whereas obviously, and city centres in general, we know there's been a lot of city centre generation around the country. And some of those city centres are nowhere near as deprived as they once were, and therefore the funding doesn't always make great sense. Unfortunately, what we do know is that the Chancellor has announced some of the other things that the government were considering, like business rates reform, pensions spring to life just prior to the pandemic and would have impacted on funding formulas around the country. They may, whether they would have helped you in that scenario, difficult to say, or possibly not, but they were part of the change. And I think government does need to look at funding again, because we have much sort of, there's a huge disparity of cost and funding around the country. I think it needs to be considered more carefully by government. I hope that will happen.
Thank you. Councillor Grossi.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome back Mr. Dossett, and commenting, following on from what Councillor Sims has said, obviously external auditors have a very busy life, but I do think it's important, especially at the relatively new onset of Mr. Dossett taking over from Ms. Daly, that we actually had the chance to establish a good working relationship together. And it is easier to do that, I think, the old-fashioned way, face-to-face and virtually. So I'm very pleased that you managed to come and see us, especially since he seems to be giving us good news. But obviously we mustn't be complacent, because as I believe I alluded to in a previous meeting, I think the spectre of COVID is still with us, and economically we shall possibly be suffering what I might describe as long COVID. A lot of our businesses will be affected, which will have a knock-on effect on our service delivery and the way in which we collect council tax and business rates. So I think the jury is still out on where we're going. I'm really interested...
Stay there, little girl. I'll ask you to sleep there, you good girl.
Thank you.
I believe that we're going to be continuing to value money work. It's always been a particular challenge for us in such a small authority. I haven't got any issues of concern, particularly, and I'm very pleased to hear that tonight I have discussed it, and maybe very pleased to support he gets from our financing. We're very pleased with the support he gets from our financing as well. I would just allude to the asset valuation, which is obviously a large amount. I think it's quoted as 24 million. You will note that in this agenda we are doing improvements to our corporate estate. We do realise it's an area that we've possibly neglected in the past. And so I would just like to say something I think that we shall be focusing on at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wishing to come in, please?
Nobody else. It's related to what Paul's comments to you earlier on. I do think to an extent central government, though they're told over and over again, don't quite realise the situation where we're like fire and rescue is about 8-10 times per capita more expensive, waste management. So if that could be alluded to with a little bit of emphasis in the audit report we finally get, it obviously helps to have somebody else saying it when we approach central government.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do have to do in that report, I mean, the Grant has a lot of benchmarking data and analysis that links place to cost. We do have, and these reports are designed to produce that information. So we will be, that type of information, we will be reflecting, because if we're to make a judgment on your use of economy, efficiency and effectiveness, we need to see the data and recognise those particular challenges. So absolutely, so that will be reflected in the report. As I said, I'm more than happy for the report to be used in discussion with government. This is a public forum.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come in on that point raised by the councillor then. We've been doing some extensive work over the summer looking at the council's financial position in terms of where we do benchmark against a number of other local authorities. We have now concluded the work. We have a report which was going to help feed a discussion that we did have planned with government officials last week, but obviously due to the reshuffle that did not happen. But I think that report now is probably in a final position to be shared with members. So we have done the benchmarking, we have done analysis, and we are sharing that information with the civil servants. So although the fairer funding element that we were aiming to piggyback on in terms of trying to get the council's financial settlement changed
looks like it may be deferred or put into the long grass, whatever terminology you used. We're still working with the civil servants to try and see whether there's anything we can do for the Council of the Isles of Scilly on the basic sort of premise that we are very, very, very small, and it could be just a very minor tweak to make changes to the way that they deal with this council without any real knock-on effect to any of the other local authorities. So that is the angle we're trying at the moment. And obviously I'll share the report that we've got with members, and we'll keep you abreast of the developments over the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank Paul Dossett from the Chair for your report. And whilst we're not completed, hopefully never will be, I'm extremely pleased to hear your comment that there are no issues of concern. That's brilliant. Brilliant news for this council and for our community. And I would particularly like to thank Russell Ashton, our 151 officer, an indictment of his work. He really has pulled out all the stops with his team for us over the last few years to get us to this position. So I really would like to thank you, Russell. I'm very pleased that you're keeping a firm hand on the tiller with the finances of this council. Thank you very much. I would also just very briefly like to say that unfortunately our meeting with the Minister around fair funding was sadly cancelled on Friday when he was removed from his post, but along with Cornwall we are fighting to get to speak to the new Minister as soon as he will speak to us. So rest assured fair funding is still very much on the table for us, and we're going to take that forward very rigorously. Thank you. I'd like to now move on to item 12 on our... Sorry, I need to just ask members to deal with the recommendation. Could I have a proposal, please, that members consider this external audit update? Councillor Groffett, second, and Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Now I will move on to item 12 on our agenda, which is the risk and Q1 non-financial performance. That's in the hands of our senior officer, Democratic Bob Dawson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the title belongs to my... Thank you, Chairman. I think the title belongs to my co-author for this report. I would also like to offer our apologies for the lateness of the report. Obviously, it was only published yesterday. It did make the draft report deadline, but with the nature of the report, the gathering of data and the collaborative feedback process, and teams very rightly taking their annual leave, there was a little bit more of a delay than anticipated, so obviously I'm more than happy to respond to further comments from members outside of the meeting, and we've also, in discussion with the Chief Executive, considered the logistics and benefits of bringing this Q1 report to the July Council rather than the September Council, so that will be alongside the Q1 finance report. So we'll definitely be looking into that. In terms of introducing the report, this is the third year of reporting both corporate risk and non-financial performance in terms of a health check across council services. And key to this continued development and improvement of reporting, which we hope to deliver, is the delivery plan for the corporate plan and the corporate plan itself, both of which are priorities under the Democratic and Corporate Service Plan for this year, which was presented to members in March this year. For risk, the main aspect of the report was the review of risk definitions carried out by the operational leadership team. This was to create greater stability among the risks, which will facilitate articulation of the direction of travel
that we're moving in terms of, for example, the delivery of further actions such that they become current controls, as well as the actual residual risk score and the ability to reduce that. The changes that have been made are summarised on page 2 of the supplement pack, with one new risk added in relation to finance, which obviously was relevant in the member discussion of the previous item in terms of future funding, and there still remain 4 red risks, 2 of which, both corporate property and the health and care integration, have now broadened definitions. The first incorporates now the housing risk, and the latter becomes expanded beyond the planned estate solution to cover the provision of health and care. So, for example, the estate solution then becomes one of the mechanisms by which the residual risk score can be reduced. In terms of performance, obviously quarter 1 covers stages 1 to 3 of the government's spring recovery plan for COVID-19, and certain measures remain substantially effective, two of which, active SILI and voucher scheme, are covered in the report, as well as you'll see the data in the Appendix B. Unrelated to the pandemic, the measure of draft reports submitted in a timely way is not reported to quarter 1, partly because the decision was made by full council late in quarter 1. I've had a discussion with IT or whether we can retrospectively look at things to get that data for quarter 1. They say it's theoretically possible, but it might be a bit too time-consuming to be able to do it. So we'll be collecting it from now on, from quarter 2 onwards, and it will be presented there, which will also include the interim position regarding the performance of collaboration arrangements with Cornwall Council. There is one red measure in relation to mandatory training, which was clearly identified for improvement by OLT, and members are also asked to note a change in the performance owner, who is now the head of HR. And for active SILI, owing to the pandemic and prior closure of the swimming pool in the previous year, members are asked to note that a different reference year has necessarily been used for target comparisons there. So that concludes my introduction, and open the floor to members.
Thank you very much, Bob. Any council wishing to come in on that, please? Councillor Bedford.
I only received it yesterday evening, and I haven't actually read it through and to analyse it. I'm actually still being informed feedback to you, sorry, Bob. So much information came to me.
I completely understand, and it was a substantial pack that you had to look at as well. So,
second those comments really. Don't want the minutes to reflect that the members have had enough time to read and absorb and think questions, make questions, formulate questions on this, because 24 hours, not even 24 hours, do that. So, I propose a recommendation, but it's not good enough.
Chief Executive, any comments from members? We'll action that. Again, I just want to add some a bit more flavour on what said. Under risk, as a result of my guidance, you'll see that we are worried about the youth and any impacts that might have on local government. We know how much money the government has spent on COVID, and we're already hearing noises about public sector, being one of the places that may well be hit hard. So that's why we've escalated that up. We won't know the answer to that until the autumn winter. The next is the collaboration agreement with Cornwall. The reason that's on there is I do know that Cornwall Council is currently suffering financial problems in terms of etc. And therefore I'm just worried that we continue to be able to have a strong relationship with the council with the fact they're helping us out in burden on them and get good quality service. That's what I'm on there. In terms of the performance figures, the main things of concern I want to bring to your attention, Chief Executive, I'm not happy at all
will see a vast improvement in the figures they were next reporting. As I said, I'm 100% in both, and that's what we'll get by the end of the year. So apologies for that. We slip backwards on that, and that's not in terms of that work. And you'll see, as Bob said, some of the issues around COVID still continue. Sickness absence still, to me, appears to be remarkably low. It is the same in all councils across the country. And we just wonder when, the new normal comes back, what impact that will be. When you're talking about normal figures being in social care of sort of 11, 12 days annual sickness, and we're into the 1 or 2, then, it's a big change, but it's still carrying on. And lastly, in consultation with the chairman, we did take out the quarterly reporting of airport numbers. They will be back in again at the next performance report. I've talked to Ross about the airport. We do still collect them, so it's not the fact that we don't have them, it's the fact that we were reporting regularly from transport. That will only continue, but there's no reason why you shouldn't have them, because the impact that could happen on the budget. So those are the Chairman, Thank you very much. Paul, Councillor Sims.
Just regarding the latest report, it's a very comprehensive report, and I'm sure Bob and everybody else involved did a massive amount of work to try and to get it in at all. Now, if they could have got it in earlier, I'm sure they would have done. So thank you for getting it in. And it's very comprehensive, and possibly we could have a workshop on this at some point. I think it's much better to get it in now than it would have been to get it in a very timely fashion for the November meeting. So thank you again.
Councillor Martin. I think it's disappointing that the report was late, but I sent one of others suggesting that if any members, after they've read the report, if they've got any questions, for Bob, that they could email him with questions. Or the workshop is fine.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crossley.
I'd just like to say how pleased I was to note that we were going to have another survey. I know we've had a small one halfway through COVID, but I think obviously our staff are our greatest resource, and their well-being is one of our key priorities. So I'm very pleased with that, and I hope that I might ask that we can have a full report on that staff survey, and if that didn't come back, we'll go ahead.
The other councillors wishes to come in. So we have 2 recommendations in front of you. Proposer, please. Councillor Martins, Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bob, for your So item 13 on our agenda is the health and safety policy revisions. And our Chief Executive. Thank you, Chairman. I'm taking this report from Mike, who would normally be here, but the reason for that is, and I have asked the monitoring officer to review on this, is that the health and safety policy is a policy that's signed and statement signed by the Chief Executive as head of the service. Your role here is to actually challenge it and to make sure that it's on track. But the responsibility of the person who ends up in jail, should it all go wrong, is myself. So just to give you clarity about that, and I've asked Simon to review whether or not we can have a decision on. So I'm not changing the report as is now, Chairman, so I'm not quite sure. I think it's here for you to know that Simon will do a review on that and make sure that we're going around service. That being said, under the Health and Safety Work Act, there's a requirement for an annual review for policy and statements. That annual review should happen no matter what, but it should also happen if there's any significant instances of change that happens. The main areas that I think we need to strengthen in the report, and I've asked Mike to look at, is particularly the oversight of health and safety arrangements as they report to the airport and to the fire and rescue service. Both of those are, as you probably know, inspected by different agencies, the Management Inspector of Fire and the CAA for the airport, but you in effect own them both. What assurance do you have as a council in terms of their health and safety? I just want to be a bit clearer about accountability on that. Ultimately, it's you, but the HMI will also respect Ashley being responsible for health and safety under the fire and rescue service, and me under the airport. And therefore, what assurance do you have that those two parties
organisation, slightly arm's length, I suppose, are doing their correctly on the health and safety program. So we might be looking at that for me particularly. The hashtag is back meeting again, which is great after COVID, and beginning to look at some of the ongoing improvements. It's great to have a member champion on that as well. Again, you need to be careful that the member champion there is to challenge and ask questions, not to make decisions, because this is operational health and safety matters, and that can get a bit blurry. There's jargon as well. So Mike Coates is what's called the competent officer under the Health and Safety at Work Act. You have to have certain qualifications to be the competent officer, and Mike is it. So in terms of any guidance from him, those are the voices that you should hear, particularly from Mike. And he's particularly focusing at the moment, because of the change in the workforce around home working. Obviously, if you work from home, that becomes your workplace, and therefore we're responsible in terms of health and safety, in terms of making sure that people have done their own risk assessments, etc., and we give them the appropriate equipment in order for them to work safely at home. So there's some work still going on there. And the other area of improvement that we're looking at is, whilst formal reporting mechanisms are robust, I'm less convinced that we have a real culture of near-miss reporting. How can we make that as easy as possible? So Mike is exploring things like people just taking a photograph and sending it in on their phone. There's no need, which is a system that Common Fire Register, for example, just take a photograph, put it into the control, send it in, and then we do a sort of build a picture about what people feel about health and safety. Medford asked some specific questions of me about the report. I'm happy to answer. The first thing was about the actual sort of process of formal reporting. The forms are all online, Council of Medford under the collaborative space, but there is also a health and safety management system that officers use, which captures risk, etc., and has a sort of risk assess process around. We're happy to show you all of that, so you can have a look at it. All members obviously can look at any of this stuff. More than happy to do that. There was a question as well about training the members in health and safety. To Andy this morning about that. We haven't got, in my view, a sort of rolling programme of training. And I know we looked down through the DPP. I think it's a conversation for us to have. So that if we do decide to have a peer review next year with the LGA, one of the questions is, where's your member development programme? We've got a member development programme. At the moment, we have a big induction push, but then we don't have an annual programme of ongoing development of members. So that will be put in place as well, which health and safety will be part of. There was a question as well about why do we encourage verbal reporting ahead of formal reporting. We don't actually. What we're saying is, if you come across something or an incident happens, please tell your line manager instantly so we can get on it, and then it's followed up with the proper paperwork, and there is full feedback to the person about what we've done about it, lessons learned, etc. That's all followed up. And lastly, in terms of risk assessments, whether you can see them or not, all the risk assessments are stored on the collaborative space. At this meeting, I'll show you where they are on the system. And those be line managers, head service, etc., all responsible for the health and safety of their particular service in terms of risk assessments. But Mike gives advice, and Mike does spot checks in terms of whether they're all up to date or not. So a bit of a ramble, but I hope that's clear. It's a report, or it's a policy and a statement for me to sign. It's for you to get assurance from me that actually we are managing health and safety within the authority, and perhaps from time to time, perhaps the scrutiny may wish to also look at the health and safety budget. Mike is coming to scrutiny in the work plan anyway to do so. Thank you.
Councillor Watt has been my champion helping me out on the hashtag. Kindly, thank you for that. Have you any comments to make? Well, only Chairman that I've been to several hashtag meetings, and to be honest, at first I thought it'd be quite a burden, and actually fact they're really, well, not really enjoyable, but really informative and interesting. And yeah, I found the hashtag group meetings are really good from all departments involved, particularly the direct aid force. The involvement there is excellent. Thank you very much.
Firstly, I would welcome training, because I think obviously all members could take more action. active role in this area. We used to have a health and safety champion. I think Councillor Guy was in that post for a bit, but sadly he stood down. And I just wonder, bearing in mind that we haven't actually had a long time to study this report, as Councillor Marcus has said, whether the Chief Exec would prefer us to note rather than approve. Perhaps he could let us know. And lastly, when is number 46, the scrutiny involvement, going to commence? Just as a matter of interest, I'm not, you know, I don't know whether or not anything's been sorted yet.
Yeah, I think I would rather, in fact, I get your point. I mean, I think my own personal view is to use those. However, currently the advice from Matt is monitoring officers to approve. So I don't know what I've asked them to do is to go back to that and review the position. But at the moment, the monitoring officers advice is to approve. So I wouldn't like to deviate from that. There is one of the monitoring officers who says that. Scrutiny, perhaps.
I'm not sure. I haven't got the work plan with me at the moment, so I think maybe it's coming in November. So I will check for you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bedford.
If I could take you answer my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment in comparison to some of the HSE policies that we have offshore. This is really quite concise and very workable. In terms of informal reporting, the offshore industry uses a system called HOC cards, hazard observation cards. They're an informal thing. They can be anonymous. Just note down you see something you don't like. They can be positive as well. You see something you really like. It may be a way to get your informal work in. They don't have to be a form. You can write it down on the back of a cigarette packet somewhere across the box. But they're also a good key performance indicator. A lot of the offshore auditing companies like to look at them. Get a hard time if we don't generate them.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I'm a bit worried in the fact that we don't have a lot of the sort of near-miss reporting. I used to be a health and safety enforcement officer, and that would be the first thing we look at in terms of whether or not you put a good health and safety culture. Because if people feel confident to keep bringing things forward without any ramifications of how it's done, so that you've got a good culture. I'm not saying we've got a bad culture, I'm just saying we need to work a little bit more.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I was pleased to read and hear the references to supporting those working from home, and I think build on from Councillor Grottick's comments at the end of the previous report. I'd just like to make sure we're giving assurance not just on the physical aspects of working from home, but also the well-being and point of view as well. I just worry that some people might come into this work. I think that's important for us as members to make sure that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very important point. That's why the annual review in terms of talking to staff about how they feel. They can raise issues in terms of mental health, well-being, isolation, all of those things are probably more in the format than they've ever been because of the COVID period. So yes, we're very much doing what we can to help those aspects.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have two recommendations. We have one recommendation that members approve the health and safety policy revision 2021. I have a proposer, please. Councillor Guy, seconded Councillor Grottick. All those in favour? Thank you very much. So, item 14 on our agenda is the corporate estate stock condition survey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my introduction to this brief and there's a lot on the agenda. The stock condition survey is a snapshot in time view of corporate and commercial property. Sort of underpinned by some principles that our buildings need to remain in regulatory compliance, they need to meet the needs of their users, and they need to remain in a good state of repair. The stock condition survey is also intrinsically linked to the the rationalisation of the corporate estate and the decarbonisation of that estate, which is the subject of the second report to full council. The stock condition survey is a process that we're going through. So initial surveys were done in November 2020, and this summer some more in-depth surveys and investigative work and drone footage of the main buildings was completed. And those surveys have given a high-level view of the required investments and a programme of work which is presented in the report. But as I said, it is a process, and those surveys still need to go through a process of validation. That's particularly working with the users and the owners of each of the individual buildings. And that is a process, given that the surveys have only just been completed this summer, that we will be going through over the coming months. What that will do is, for the budget setting process, will inform us of the works packages that we need to do in order to go forward with the stock condition work. In terms of the current budget for this year, the report highlights this will remain unchanged, but asks for approval of recommendations around particular priorities. Those priorities being a focus around the heating system at Carn Gravel to deal with the Legionella issue there, but also to take the opportunity to install a low-carbon heating system at the same time as those significant works are being done. To take action to sort out the issues with leaks and vents relating to the sports hall roof. To work on the airport, the leaks there, and to prioritise some works at Park House. The report also talks about the need to put in place an asset management software system to manage the council's assets. We plan to investigate the best options for the council, but we intend to have a system that can look at both the corporate estate and housing together so that we can start to combine works, get good efficiency there. The report also said that we'll be carrying out a review of procurement of our planned and reactive maintenance to ensure that we are in regulatory compliance with procurement rules and that we are getting value for money out of those services. The report also says that there will be a further report brought to council in relation to our commercial estate, giving options and recommendations. The commercial estate, just for clarity, is slightly different to part of the corporate estate, but those buildings that we lease out to businesses. So in summary, the majority of the recommendations that we're putting forward are merely to note. There is one recommendation to approve, which is the prioritisation of those works to be carried out in this financial year. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Good report. Well overdue, not overdue. We talk about our corporate estate for the council, which is now still quite a while. So, and this is a good starting point. Quite scary numbers come with it, but maybe not as scary as we thought they might be. But yeah, it's a starting point. It gives us, options going forward. I mean, the next report is probably more interesting. We talk about rationalisation of our estate, what we need to keep, what maybe we can get rid of, how to use what we have. But yeah, thanks for the report. I'll propose the recommendation.
Councillor Grotty.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I take on board what the lead member has said. It's a work in progress, and I'm really glad to see this report. However, it would be interesting, I think, for all members to begin the full Curry Road survey, so that we have rather a current thing. We had a large agenda with very detailed actually look at very limited reports. And I think further down the thing is actually having a full Curry Road survey would be very easy. So if I could ask if members could see them. I've actually seen the one from Park House, and it's disturbingly full of lead, as we might have expected for a building of that age and usage. But I would just like to ask Mr. Ridley how, when you're faced with a load of red, you actually choose which red you take first. I'm not asking for detailed analysis. I would just hope that by this winter, the clients and staff of Park House will be warmer and more comfortable. And I think is coming on that.
Okay.
Shall I just finish with my third question, or would you like to come back to this?
Shall I do the reds bit? I think the most important thing for us in considering our estate is making sure that it's safe. What we can give you assurance about right now is it's safe. So in terms of our electrical works, our Legionella testing, all that statutory compliance, it's done. So in terms of then the priorities, it's about what we're going to do to make our estate comfortable and more usable. So what I want to do today is just give you the assurance that those essential repairs that were identified, the November report wasn't the Curry and Brown report, that was an earlier report. We actioned those essential works before Jim started to make sure that we were regulatory compliant, we're health and safety clear. So the works we then do, the ones that Jim's looking at in terms of then prioritising, in terms of what are the buildings that we use the most, which ones have third-party users, which ones are important to maintain staff motivation and council reputation, and that's the prioritisation that Jim's been doing as we move forward. So I've given Jim a clear remit to make sure we're safe, and once we're safe, what are the most important buildings, and then we'll work through the rest of the report. So to give you a snapshot of one time won't give you the answer, because actually the end user, the people who are using the buildings, also need to have a say, because you get a quantity surveyor that comes around and have a view about the building, but actually how you use it and what's important to those users is important, and that's the work we've done with Park House, is talk to the carers in there to say what's important to you. So a survey report won't say it's good to put some more storage in here, because actually that's an end user requirement. So we're trying to get the whole picture by piecing those pieces of jigsaw together to make sure we come up with the right solutions. So it's not about taking one bit of information, it's about collating all that information and then verifying it before we go into action in terms of what we're going to do. I hope that explains the approach.
I just want to say to Councillor Williams that that's on this subject, or you are doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't disagree with the priority areas, but I guess what I'm disappointed in and what the community would be asking questions on, the fact that 3 and 4 priorities aren't particularly on the piece of work, because that's multiple rooms, multiple meetings, elements of the airport rooms, I take the wider one, but we spoke about value for money in terms of the audit report, but it doesn't strike me as great value for money when we're talking about some of the new infrastructure not being good. So it is, how can you assure us and how can we assure the community that going forward we won't be faced with investments which are quality really. They are sort of, I would expect a room to last longer than 10 years and things like that, and the heating system to last longer than 10 years. So how can we be going forward answer those sorts of questions?
Yeah, okay, so I think Jim's first job was to go and look at those warranties and guarantees. And that's one of the first things he did, to find out whether we had any comeback on those original contractors. That's still work in progress, so we are still running that in parallel. But those warranties and guarantees don't look particularly useful at this point in time. How that happened is something we have to unpick in the work as we move forward. And I think the work that Jim's talking about around the procurement and value for money as we move forward includes that warranty and guarantee work. So what we do moving forward has to be what I call fit and forget, that it minimises the amount of repair and maintenance going forward. And if you look at some of the specifications for the work that was done for the sports hall, it's a template that you have to meet the requirements of for the funding. So it's over-designed really for the island. So actually on the mainland, those things that were put in would probably be absolutely appropriate. But in the climate in which we live and work, it probably wasn't the most appropriate bit of kit. And that's when it comes down to your contract management at the time you're doing that, managing that expectation against what the funder requirements are going to be. And I think we'll look at that when we come to the museum moving forward, because the funder requirements are you must have this specification. And actually what we need for the islands is something quite different, and having that specification might cause us problems moving forward. How do you balance that two out when the funders are absolute about those requirements? So those mechanical ventilation bits of kit that were put in at the airport and the sports hall Would you do that today, in knowing what we know now? Probably not. So how do we use that learning as we move forward with our investment programme going forward? But there's always that balance about what's required for funders and what's appropriate for the islands, and sometimes quite a difficult conversation to have between the two.
Thank you. Councillor Benson, please.
Thank you, Nicola. Just a couple of queries, really. I think that the next report is probably more relevant. But we're talking about moving up regard to Park House, and you're saying that it's going to be a more comprehensive report, including carers. However, I actually think it also needs to include residents that are living there. You're actually talking about people's homes, where a sports hall and the airport are not used as someone's home, and the perception of what you want in someone's home, I would argue, is very different from the perception of what you want in sport. Also, I think you actually need to ask your relatives to improve that level, and also the other people that come and visit the contract. I've probably spent thousands of hours of my life in the contract, and I do have an opinion about how difficult things can be at times, and how good the carers are if the actual infrastructure of a room doesn't accommodate the equipment you need, then it's almost impossible to work with that. So I would ask for more involvement from the other people to give that overall holistic picture.
I think that's a very good point.
I think it does say in the report that we're taking into the view of the account of residents. If it doesn't, I meant to. But we absolutely, it's residents and the staff. But I take your point about the relatives as well. So yeah, we can take that on board certainly.
I'll just come back to Councillor Grotting, and then I'll take Councillor Guy.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment that the airport project cost, I think, between 5 and 6 million. And I find it very sad that we are looking at having to spend 100,000 now on remedial work. I accept that some of it may be in an older part of the building, but some of the problems have lasted from the inception of the work, to the point where the then Councillor Bennett, having been delayed for a day on a very cold winter's day, actually ran the town hall to say, send blankets. I don't think she was really expecting the blankets. I think she was just making the point that it was very, very cold out there. And I think that's very, very sad. I would have hoped we had some redress against the builder. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Guy.
As you know, when we look at there is a lot that goes on. One of my concerns, Nicola, was I know we are where we are now, but with future projects and jobs, can we look at more of the retention? Because obviously the retention money on that project has been paid, which means that the jobs are being signed off by somebody. And going back to the health and safety at the airport, there are panels now up on the roof. When it rains, there is water with buckets everywhere. What if the kiddies ripped and hurt themselves? What if somebody left their laptop on and it's just an element that needs addressing. That's where I put us.
It's all about good contract management, and hopefully with the new team we've got better and improved contract management.
I think other members have kind of touched on it before, but the thing about this paper is it's starting to make long-term decisions for the council. Even though there's a lot of stuff to know here, we're starting to move in the direction, and the implications of these decisions are going to be felt for years and years to come, which means that I think members need to be fully sighted of what their decisions, what decisions we are making. It would be great if we could have had a bit of a workshop around it, so we're more sighted about what this actually entails. There's a lot, this is going to be a theme for the next 4 or 5 papers in this meeting. There's a lot of density in these papers, and it's really hard within the time frame we've got to come to an informed decision, to be, we know generally these are the right decisions, but we have to be, these decisions have to be successful outside of this room. You guys, the officers, are the ones that you propose recommendations, but we're the ones who are going to get talked to in the pub. We're going to be asked why we're so, whatever. We've got to be able to come up with that answer. I don't feel that this paper is solid enough for me to do that at the moment. So I would all those kind of things that you get asked as members in the public, we need to be able to answer those to you and to get, know those answers. So,
I think, Dan, that's a really good point, and I think the point around the detail is why we've linked it to the budget setting, because that gives you prioritisation. So there's some things we're going to have to do, because it's about the structure of the building, and there's some things about making it nicer, which we might do, which needs to be part of the budget setting process. So the idea mainly is to bring, once we've got all the information together, is to do it as part of the budget setting process, so you can look at the detail and decide which way, where the investment goes and when, because there will be some decisions to make about what's important and what's not. To defend Cornwall, well, that funding was already in the budget to do that work, because it links to the Legionella, which is a mandatory requirement, and we have to do it. So we can come offline and talk separately about what the rationale is for that, but it was something we have to do. So I think the rest of them about what order we do them in and whether we do them or not, and I think that absolutely is part of the budget setting process. So part of the workshops around budget need to include more detail around what piece of the jigsaw we've got so far on these.
Yeah, I think it's sort of back to, I talked about it being a process, so we only got the surveys were only completed, that last lot in August. So we wanted to bring something to council quickly so that you could see, at least at a high level, where we were going, that stuff was moving, and in order to start to make some decisions about how we prioritise work this year. Otherwise, we end up not really getting anything done in this financial year. So that was why but certainly that validation process of talking to users is certainly workshops can feature in that with members, definitely.
When you're doing the details of Park House, perhaps you could remember the Richard Addison Fund and the McDonald Fund. We have in the past done new carpets for Park House, and I think yours has done something as well, Fran, am I right? And I'm sure that we could contribute to some of the smaller things that you need to do, especially with carpeting. I mean, carpeting has only been down, I think, about 2 years, some of it.
We haven't enough space to
Do you remember that when we have got one there?
It's a good point.
I agree with Councillor Martin. We need a far more detail. I mean, this is a lot of money to be spending. I don't know what Russell thinks about it. Smiling there. I think we need more detail.
That's part of the budget set.
Councillor Sims. I was going to ask about events on the roads, but the question was essentially going to be why. I think we've dealt with that one. The other thing is the Legionella. Now, that's going to be quite alarming for people. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's because there's mobility in the system, because there's just not enough people using the amount of water that's available. So it's just sitting there, and is that the problem?
You have to move the water around, but it's about how the system was set up and where the ends of the system are. So it's called dead legs, and it's in the disabled toilet at the end of the corridor. And there's some issues. I'm not a technical expert on this, but what I do know is that it's fundamentally an issue with the system that's been put in. So you can keep flushing it and keeping it clean, but actually to solve the problem in the long term, you've got to replace the system that's put in. It's a design system that doesn't really work for us.
Monumental waste of water, I guess.
No.
Waste, but you know what I mean. Water that could be used.
Suits our use of the building.
Councillor Martin. Just to get to the recommendations, the only thing we're actually deciding here, there's a lot to note, isn't there? What's the thing we are deciding here?
The priority of works for this financial year, using the current budget that's already allocated to this financial year around the car and gravel heating system, sports hall roof, airport roof and park house.
Clear on that. This is, as you said, the start of a long journey, overdue, which this council should be focusing on. So we're not going to fix everything overnight. This is the start of, as I said, I think we've started into a 5-7 year journey of getting these investments sorted, which the major investment issues need to be dealt with programme. So this is the prioritisation spend of the budget you've already approved in this year. The big numbers you're worried about, that was the 1 million and all the rest of it, we're not approving today. It becomes part of the budget round, by which time there'll be a further chat around which ones we're going to keep, because we're not going to keep. I take down the point work around all of that, part of the budget round. So we're not asking you for the millions of pounds today. Don't worry, we're asking you whether you approve the prioritisation of car house, the airport, car block, etc.
Anybody else? Councillor Carr. Just want to play one more point. Just regarding the airport, you have 100,000 visitors a year come to City, all rely on tourism. The first thing they see at the airport and the last thing they see at the airport, those that travel by air. So I just put that we could fix the roof or the inside, make it, because there's a lot of complaints from visitors leaving saying what a shambles it is. That's just for the record.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I was just going to echo what the Chief Executive said, that when we set the budget and the medium-term financial plan in February, we already knew that we had some pressing need for investment to do the work that was needed as a priority. You approved a line in the capital programme, which is what we are deciding today to prioritise, so that's already in the capital programme. We did foresee this when we set our financial plan back in February. The bigger numbers will need to feed into the process going forward, as we've already said, and they'll need to be prioritised against our other financial commitments going forward. I have had early discussions with the lead member for finance, and I think this year when we do the budget setting process and the workshops, we are going to start with capital at the beginning, the first one, because obviously there are some pressing capital requirements going forward over the next 4 to 5 years. And just to give members assurance that we will have workshops. There'll either be a workshop which is generated from the work today from corporate estate work, or the workshops that will be related to the budget setting process going forward. And we'll both be targeting the same issue, is what is the capital programme requirements going forward. So I think I'd hope that you get assurance that there is not a decision today that we're going to commit £1.6 million, but that will be a future decision, and we'll use workshops to get you briefed on that accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russell. So, members, can I just go back to the point that our Chief Executive made? That is, we're talking about the prioritisation of the works, mainly here at the moment. So, is there any more debate about that? Does anyone want to ask any more questions or make any further points or recommendations around the priority?
That's to propose the motions.
Do I have a second then? Councillor Guy. All those in favour? Thank you. So we keep with corporate estate. Item 15 on the agenda is also in your hands, Jim, regarding rationalisation and decarbonisation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We did originally have these together as one report, and it was a bit too much, so we separated them out because they are sort of very separate issues. Again, we start with some principles similar to the stock condition, but slightly different. One being that we want buildings that are fit for purpose. Two, we want buildings that meet our zero carbon ambitions. The Council set out the climate emergency. And three, that we want buildings that are flexible and efficient and meet the needs of modern working practices. So fit for purpose is all around meeting the needs of users and providing healthy working spaces for staff, but also for our customers who visit, and many members of the public visit our buildings because they take services from the council in those buildings. And fit for purpose, as we said in the sub-condition work, also means around maintaining regulatory compliance. In terms of zero carbon, this is to bring the buildings in line with the climate emergency that was declared in April 2018. and that's all around minimising the amount of carbon that is emitted from our buildings. Two key things will help us do that: insulating and making those buildings energy efficient, and installing low carbon heating systems. So the report is looking for support to develop over the coming months a full decarbonisation plan for the corporate estate. In terms of modern working, once we come back post-COVID, return to work, it offers the opportunity to work slightly differently, to work in a more flexible way, create more flexible working spaces in line with that policy. And we've identified those new patterns of working through a survey that we've done with staff. So we know there's a different type of working that people want to do now. So in terms of the estate rationalisation, we sort of start that story with the decision that was made at July full council to support in principle the town hall as the preferred option for the cultural centre, which then leaves the staff and services that run from the town hall as needing a home. We're currently trialling some flexible working out of the Portsmouth Enterprise Centre with some hot desks that have been set up there, with a view to moving to that building as a more permanent workspace. We need to carry out some due diligence, as that was funded under the European Regional Development Fund, to ensure that we can do that, but we will do that, and we're in the process of doing that. In terms of Carn Gwavel, again, another key building which we're recommending is retained as a key building and service area for the council, and we just talked about the investment that we intend to put into that building this year, primarily around the heating system. In terms of Morwell, the stock condition survey recommends a significant investment needed in the buildings along Morwell Lane, to the point where really those buildings have been condemned and need to be demolished at some point. They've still got some life in them, but they do need to be demolished. And that allows us to think again about the whole Morwell site. So along Morwell Lane, the enclosed site itself and various bits of land adjacent to that. So the report is recommending that we develop a master plan for the Morwell site. The Morwell Lane obviously backs onto the Portsmouth Enterprise Centre, with some of the shift down there. You can see that there is a master plan needed for that whole area. And something quite creative and exciting could be done down there. In terms of Park House, we've also talked about that quite a bit, but we've got to think about the integrated health and social care project that is happening. Once we have definitely got the green light for that project, that will enable us to plan properly, but we're not going to put any plans into place yet. We will plan properly for what happens with Park House once we know, and that will again steer us in what investment we put into now. And finally, on commercial property, again, those buildings that we lease out, rent out, we're saying that we will bring another paper, a review, within the next 6 months, giving proposals and options for those buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think question for Jim. The garages down at Morwell, I thought they were Dutchy. They're council, are they?
They are Dutchy. So when we talk about the master plan, that includes conversations with the Dutchy about those leases. So the leases there's a number of different leases. There's one lease which includes the emergency planning shed and the carpenter's shed, as it's called. The garages are then part of the lease, which is the main enclosed Morwell site, and there's a third lease, which is the small triangle of land at the back, where there's a bit of coppicing work being done.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good report. I think the first two recommendations that we talked about them before, we agreed them before, I'm aware. Third and fourth recommendations, I think, are the exciting ones. The Morwell site and the various different leases and agreements on the land down there is to all agree with a bit of a muddle. So we really need to rationalise that and do the whole site.
articulated earlier, we need a lot more member input. A lot more work to be done, which I don't believe this is the right forum today. I think we need to go into detail the workshop in due course. The report's good and it focuses us to say activity long overdue, but I don't think we want to get involved in the nitty-gritty here today. I'm conscious of the time. This meeting, we've got a lot to get through yet. Marianne, Councillor Bedford.
I take your point, thank you, Chairman, and I would support a workshop, because I have been sent a copy of the report, and there's an awful lot of information in there that I think some councillors need to understand and really get our heads around. The Park House is particularly interesting. The fit for purpose criteria is probably very different than the fit for purpose of the airport or another building, so I would like some further debate on that. I don't think very well because the work's gone into more well. It's a bit of a mess down there, so I think it's very positive. A lot of positive in this report, really, and I think that our potential for things is well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watt. Thank you, Chairman. Just comment a couple of questions. 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 14 mentions office working patterns, and a hybrid working arrangement has been found recently to be 12% more efficient than just the strictly office work. That's just a comment. Paragraph 36, and this mentions focus groups about feasibility work. Are members to be included in that, or is that just a workforce focus group?
Could be both.
Good. Finally, paragraph 46, I do take that point about storage could be expensive, and I applaud the principle in the final sentence about storing what is necessary to reduce costs and so on. Very, very hard to put into practice. And I can quote a really good example of that. Years ago when I was an officer, many other officers in the council used to throw stuff away. If it was more than 6 weeks on their desk, they used to throw it away. But I'm a terrible hoarder. And 2 or 3 years later, they would always come back to me and say, "Do you remember that?" And I said, "Yes, I've still got it." So, I applaud that, but it is very, very hard to put into place. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Councillor Mark.
Yeah, just to echo what you said, Chairman. Member involvement, especially with recommendation 4, we need to be fully inclusive of all the options before we make a decision with the council. And also just in terms of decarbonisation as well, I really want to make sure, hope that we're not transferring carbon costs to people's homes rather than removing it just from the office. And we can try and have that theme running through our decisions as well.
Councillor Sims.
Well, I think we've got a proposal. I'm happy to second the motion. So I was just looking at it. It's that members agree, members support, members support, members support. And that's fine. It's just that some of these things will be quite difficult to achieve, like the buildings meet the net zero carbon ambitions and things. So I'm sure we'll do our absolute level best to make it work. But getting it to 100%. Some of the buildings we've got may well be a mountain we can actually climb.
Thank you.
I think something that just highlights is carbon cost. The fact that the previous report and the two are in tandem, the cost of the heating in Carwell. I think option 3 with fossil fuel was 220,000. Having carbon free is 280,000. So there's a cost of £60,000 there to be carbon free. I'm going to throw a big stone on this one. I've been very lucky in my life to have worked in research into climate change. I had 6 years of drilling for core samples for scientists all around the world, 2 years in the United States Antarctic program. It's very privileged to come into contact with a lot of very eminent climatologists, scientists. One gentleman that stuck in my mind was Dr. John Anderson, who's the head of sciences at Rice University in Houston. And his take on it man is arrogant, A, think we could cause it, and B, even more arrogant, think we could save it. It's going to happen anywhere. So, I wonder, in a small area like here, spending £60,000 there, neutral, when China are building 40 new coal-fired power stations, you need to look at trying to go carbon free in a positive way. Yes, insulation is going to save heat, it benefits everybody. But I think we just need to be aware that perhaps our efforts could be more directed, the money of that. Maybe that £60,000 should be put in another row of bricks in the sea walls. It's going to happen anyway.
But I hope to prove that the £60,000 investment will save money in the long term as well. So a technology like a heat pump versus importing gas cylinders that can't grapple should be cheaper to run.
So we have a proposal for the seconder. All those in favour of the recommendation? Move on now to slide 16 on the agenda, new museum trust centre, delivery update and our strategic statement. Economy and environment different. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So it's a meaty agenda, and here's another good one for you. We've talked a lot about the museum recently, and I think when I've done sort of recap, we've been to council I think 5 times now around the museum, and I thought, if I'm getting confused about where the hell we are, then probably you are too. So what I'm trying to do is draw it all together in this one report to say, this is where we are now, this is where we need to get to, and try and make sense of that to give you a heads up really as we go into budget setting around the capital programme of what that might be looking like as we move into the future towards delivery of a new facility. It's also timely because we've got the LEP here, the Local Enterprise Partnership. They've got a board meeting here next week. We've also got the Chief Executive of the Arts Council here who will be showcasing the islands to them and looking how deep their pockets are in terms of potential funding to help us with our cultural programme and our aspirations for a new facility. So we've got a plethora of different funding bids. And I have been taking my chances. I've spent most of the summer, I think, putting funding bids in, knowing probably 9 times out of 10 we weren't going to be successful. But we do know which ones we're most likely to get funding from as we move forward into a capital programme, and that's around the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So the focus from now on is going to be looking towards how we get ourselves in the best position to get capital funding as we move forward. So what I call, the stage we're in at the moment is called what I call the seed funding stage. It's the really painful stage where you're putting money out in revenue money to try and get business cases built, to try and persuade people that this is the right thing to do. And that's the one where you can't always get that money back. Because you need to do that work to get us into the big money, the 5 million pots that we're talking about in terms of National Lottery funding or Arts Council Capital Programme funding. So at the moment we've made various committed to putting bits of money together. But what I wanted to do here was just pull that together for you to say, if you add that all up, our worst case scenario at the moment is we'll be putting around 240,000 in revenue to build up the case to get us to what I call stage 3, which is where we can put those capital bids in. Now, we're hopeful that we'll get Community Renewal Fund to pay for most of that, but it's possible we won't get that because we're not a priority area. So it's flagging that up to say in the worst case scenario, this is what the council's commitments might have to be between now and March. It's where Russell gets a bit twitchy and we become best buddies, or they're trying to explain my rationale. So what we've got to do is think about, is there anybody else that can help us with that revenue funding? Of course, the LEP here next week, we'll be making a bit of a bid for some funding from them as part of our presentation. But what we do need to know is that with some certainty is to maintain this momentum, are we willing to put our hands in our pocket if the worst comes to the worst to make sure that we can get those capital funding bids in next year. We're going to put an expression of interest in from the National Heritage Lottery Fund, and that's about £5,000, and you'll see that in the recommendations that we move forward with that. But at the moment, I think the ball's in our court because the other partners have all agreed with the third option for the town hall, but nobody's got any pockets with any funding in at the moment. So it sort of sits on our shoulders to progress this site, and that links us back to our legal obligations in relation to the museum and our long-term lease that sits on the regional facility. So it's a difficult conversation, I think, because it's not a great time to be asking for lots of revenue, but actually if we don't do it now, we're going to miss all the funding opportunities that will make the possibility of a new museum and cultural centre be possible. And those funding pots are there now. We don't know whether they're going to be there next year. And even with a fair wind, if we get this work done in between now and March, we're still not looking to get an open facility, even with the best of timelines, until March 2025. So this is a scheme that will get us to 2025 opening, but it needs us to invest now. So there are a number of recommendations set out on pages 137 and 138, 7 recommendations, noting the progress, noting that we've already proposed to put in some match funding for the Arts Council project, because we had to put an expression of interest we had to put that bid in August, and then the expression of interest for the National Heritage Lottery Fund needs to be done by November, which costs about £5,000, and then hopefully we'll be able to progress that through to a full application for capital funding in March of next year, which will take a further 225k. So at the end of the day, there will be a need to transfer the facility over. That comes later in the process. It's just a heads up now in that recommendation 7 about those funding requirements require lease at least 52 years or a freehold to be able to access the capital grants to pass on to a museum trust, a museum association, or whatever that entity becomes as we move the project forward. So I think it's a good news story in that we're all pointing in the right direction. It's just we need some funding to get there now, and if we're going to do it, it needs to be now to make sure we get a facility off the ground, and also to coincide with the visit of the LEP and the Arts Council next week. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Williams. Yeah, my comment on the recommendation 6 in the protocol that you said about half an hour ago when we were talking about revenue reviews and local government maybe being and we might know more in the autumn, winter. I'm just reluctant to approve this now, but in the back of our minds we know there could be a bit of a crash coming. And that's an awful lot of reserve. I just welcome Russell's point of view. Do we have to agree to recommendation 6 now? Or can we keep that until we know we've exhausted every possible opportunity, by which time we might know more about whether the kind of people in Whitehall are going to burst off or not?
Yeah, I can come back. Thank you, Chair. The proposal is obviously to draw the general fund reserve, which is sat at just over £2 million. I've actually got an update to £2.4 million at the moment. That is to fund the work to progress the scheme up to REBA Stage 3 by March 2022. I if we don't commit it, then we will not obviously be in a position to progress the scheme to that level, which I think Nicola will say it would be an issue with putting in the Community Renewal Fund and some of the other bids that we need in the future. It is a difficult one with the financial position we face. What will the government settlement be? And obviously our general fund is a buffer against a poor settlement. But I think we have potential liabilities around the museum, the existing museum building, the museum operations, and the condition of the town hall, which we will need to address. And I think at the moment this investment of the 225,000 from the general reserve is probably a good investment to develop our plans to mitigate those other risks, which could be far more significant in the medium term.
Thank you, Russell. Councillor Mark.
Yeah, reading the report and trying to work through it, the kind of similar to what's in the Stock Condition survey about making the town for the Chapel check. And there was kind of point out we don't really have a choice with my liabilities around the town hall. We look around it. So I know that's made me think appreciative of the work that the officers doing to try and minimise those liabilities you have. Because that's the bottom line. We really are going to have to do something with the museum. It's probably not just theatre around that, but we are going to have to we are liable for that. So we can discuss it all night, but really.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mars. Wise words.
Very wise words. But there'll be a counterbalance to it as well, which is, we've just been named as a priority area for art investment. We have got the chief executive of the art next week. We've worked really hard to build strong relationships with partners to get a really exciting cultural centre facility. So forgetting the absolutely, wise words about, hold on a minute, but I'd flip that now and say this is an absolutely amazing opportunity that we should try and get the council in a good position for. Point about funding settlement, but actually we're also looking for weather facilities, we're looking for some of the community to have pantomimes, cultural events, farmers markets, etc. Everybody's actually interested about that, and this is the best way that we can take the opportunity next week if council is so minded to support it. Or when the chair, the vice chair, and I are going to be down with the chief executive of the Arts Council, and they'll have you to say, why are you really committed to the arts in the arts city nation? Why would we want to invest in the arts too? And we'll be able to say, this council will support it. And we've got council resolutions to back that up. Not because you were I'm just trying to, there's a practical side, there's an opportunity side, and these don't use the side of both. Very wise words said. Thank you very much. All wise words to you. Councillor Sid.
In recommendation 6, this is the sentence I've read in this whole report back more than any of the others, and I completely, I'm absolutely sure that recommendation has not been put in lightly. It's been thought, there's a great deal of thought has gone into that. And the only thing I'm quite keen on the use of up to. There's no reason to think that we will spend 225 grand on this. Hopefully we won't, and it could be considerably less. But so I'm happy to propose the recommendations.
Just a question for Nicola. Maybe I'm confused with all this myriad of funding streams with this project, like you mentioned at the beginning. But I know at the Island Partnership Board meeting last week, we agreed a contribution of up to £10,000, but I don't see this mentioned in this report.
The Arts Council project support, so it's a revenue stream. So on the updated one, it's the third one up from the bottom. It's a revenue stream. So it's a match contribution to match what we've put in.
Thank you. So we have a proposer, Councillor Guy Sampson.
I'll second it, yes.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Right, I should just mention that Councillor Brock, Vice Chair, and Councillor Roger have not voted because they're involved in this project. I would say they're very supportive. They can't. Thank you very much. Right, thank you, Nicola, for that report. Your next report is item 17, proposed site disposal of the former secondary school in Carnforth.
Wasn't an easy job you gave me, was it, when I came in? So the next challenge you said was build some houses or get some houses built. So as part of the corporate priorities, we've been working hard over the last, I realise I've been here 4 years now, to get houses built on some of our sites and to acquire sites for development. The first site I brought to you today is the Carn Thomas site, the secondary school site, which was already in council ownership and has been vacant since about 2016. I think the old school was demolished. So what I'm trying to do is find a delivery partner, someone who's going to develop that site out. And we've been working across the sector to talk to private developers, to talk to registered providers, to say who's interested. We've had Cornwall Rural who've been in and out. We've had places for people through their carbon C, through the Duchy proposals who've been in and out. And this basically is because of the risks and the viability issues associated with delivering affordable homes on the island. If it were easy, we wouldn't have a problem. We'd put it on the market and they'd be queuing up outside the door and developing it tomorrow. If only, I say. So what we've done is we've worked hard to build a relationship up with the on-island providers already. And Live West have come forward with this site to say, okay, we haven't got full board approval yet, but we've started progress discussions with their board around using this site as an exemplar for low carbon living. So it's outside of their normal remit. They do 100% affordable schemes, but they can't get the figures to work here. But what they can do is say to their board, this could be an exemplar. So working alongside Live West and Homes England, we've been talking about what that gap funding might look like in terms of bringing this site forward. And Homes England are recognising that in a strategic delivery partner like Live West, we've got our best chances of getting delivery here. So what the proposal is today is that they're going to seek to get an option, they've sought to get an options agreement with us, the first step in taking the site forward towards delivery. Now that's important because we've got some land release fund on this site to help de-risk the site, so clear the site, make it provide a level platform for development, make it suitable for developers to come in. And we've got to have an agreement in place for the land to be released by March 2023, and that's a contract to release the site to make sure that we don't have to refund that money. So these things have all come together at the same time. Live West have come to the table. I've suggested an options agreement to them. They said, yeah, it's a toe in the water. What's an options agreement, you say? An options agreement is just them saying, right, we'll take the risk now, we'll put the planning application in. Because unlike the Enna Farm site, we haven't had money from anywhere to get planning permission on this site. It's an allocated site, so we know it's suitable for housing. We've done public engagement on it, so we know we've got community back-in, but we haven't got the detailed planning application sorted yet. And as we know from the Enna Farm site, that costs a couple of $100,000 to get through the process. So rather than going to Russell and asking for that, in the options agreement, Live West will put the hand in the pocket and take it through the plan application stage. At which point they get first dibs, if you like, on the purchase of the site beyond that. So we have to do some due diligence. We've got to do some legal work. We've got to do some true market valuations on the site. It has an asset value for our auditors, but that's not a market value. Because the market value takes into account the site viability and the use of affordable homes. So the recommendations are set out on page 245 and 246. It's really around, first of all, getting the options agreement in place. Secondly, then proceeding through to that sale so that we dispose of the site in accordance with the grant funding that we've got. But we need to do some due diligence before we do that. I'll give you an update of where we've got to on that land transfer and the plan application within the next 6 months. But there's a number of delegations we've put in there. We've also included recommendation 7, inclusion of the land release fund into the capital programme, because that hasn't been captured yet as well. But it's the next step. It's our next best chance. They go to board in October. What they need when they go to board is some sort of reassurance from this council that we're committed to making this happen. So they're the recommendations for the Chairman.
Councillor Dean.
Yeah, just to reiterate the final point a public show or basically to Live West that we are committed to this site, that we've got to say it's been empty for 5 years, it's a bit of a hassle, it's an embarrassment to the island, that there's, emails for development and nothing's happened. This is our best opportunity, and we've got to show really to Live West, or else, we might lose this chance as well.
Very much. Councillor Mark.
Again, the theme that we've had throughout the last 4 or 5 papers is that there's a lot of stuff to get your head around. So I've got a lot of issues around there just being, it's so dense. And with the next paper as well about it would be good to get more, to have a forum to get more into the detail of stuff. So get more of a grasp on it. The options agreement, the options period, how long does that last for?
So we've got a timeline that they've set out on page 251. So what we've been talking about is what sort of timescale do we think? So if we enter into an options agreement by January, they expect to do some design principles, working with the community and ourselves by April next year. Start some full public consultation before putting a plan application. That would start in July, and then they put a plan application in. And then, at the end of that, getting the plan application approved, that's when the options agreement then turns into them working into the sale of the site. So then between September and February 23, we'll be then looking at the site sale.
What about if there's a planning, what they don't put planning? Are they committed to putting planning?
Yes, that's the obligation upon on their side, is they have to put the plan application in.
We are to bind them to that fact. There will be a planning application coming on. Okay, what does Live West gain? I know we're de-risking it. What do they gain from?
It's almost like they're doing us a favour, it feels like, at the moment. What they're trying to seek is their board approval to do something that's an exemplar scheme. So they've got their normal pattern book of designs. What I've suggested here is an opportunity to do something that's as close to zero carbon as possible. So they've already got quite good sustainability credentials there in the top 10 in the country in terms of awards for sustainability. But could they do an exemplar here on the islands in terms of solar power, in terms of water usage, in terms of electric vehicle usage or electric scooter usage for the site, which allows them to do something that they can promote to the sector as best practice. So the sale for them is use the Isles of Scilly as a showcase for your best practice.
So again, it's all really exciting research where we've had previously the last paper about council maybe making a decision it thought was great at the time and then coming back to bite us years down the line. So it's just reiterating that it would be good to have opportunities to have more in-depth conversations about this, maybe not in public.
Hopefully, if you've got 20 affordable homes on the site, nobody's going to criticise you too much.
I think this is the very definition of a buyer's market, this one, isn't it? I mean, we've been trying for such a long time to get this moving, and obviously you mentioned we've come to do due diligence on it, but I'm very supportive of this. I think it's, if we don't take this opportunity, we could well be saddled with it for another 15 years. So I very much propose the recommendations.
Well, not particularly paragraph 11, it talks about the company taking a fabric first approach. I was just wondering what that meant. And secondly, am I right in thinking that they would be exempt from the right to buy if they're in this route?
Yeah. Okay. So fabric first is basically getting the thermal envelope of the building right. So you build a really high quality, energy efficient envelope for the building so that it costs less to run. So basically, you keep your fuel bills down. So that's always been their stance, is that you keep it as affordable for anybody, for any tenants to rent in the future, so you're not spending money on. So it's above and beyond building control standards. In terms of right to buy, currently, as a housing registered provider housing association, they will be exempt from that, but the government are looking to change those rules.
Thank you. Nicola, could I just ask you, the Chair, you may have it in the report, so apologies. What, similar to taking up the partnership agreement here, but the point is, if and when they get planning permission, what do we have in our armoury, if you like, to make sure that they get started and they get delivered, and by what date? Because we're well aware of people got to move in afterwards. So is there, do we have any control over that?
So in the options agreement and in the sale, we tie them to the timeline that they've suggested here, or any further agreed amendments to it. So the agreement that's set out on page 251 is from them, that they would start on site in June 23 and build completion by April 2025. There's a lot going on in 2025, isn't there? So we tie that into the options agreement and into the contract of sale.
So there will be a legal agreement over that?
Between, on both, yeah.
Thank you. So we have a proposer. Do we have a seconder? Have we got a seconder, please? Councillor Roger. All those in favour of the recommendation? Is that unanimous? Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Item 18, also in your hands, the housing cycle concept.
Yes. So a slightly different solution here. This was a site where we have had some funding to get us through the plan application stage, and the council have invested its own funds in the purchase of the site from the Duchy. We've boxed clever on the funding as well, so we've got an outstanding bid in for self-build land release fund. We haven't had formal word yet that we've been successful, but we hope to hear very shortly that we'll be able to make an announcement on that. But there is quite a significant amount of money that we'll be able to find, hopefully towards creating a site that will be as affordable as possible for self-builders. So the funding we've sought will enable us to get in the services to the plots to make sure that we can then sell the sites on to self-builders. So how do we get to that stage has been the challenge for us, because actually it takes up all our time trying to get these self-built sites off the ground. We have just one officer in Sean who works on housing delivery, but has been fairly committed to the work on our COVID test and trace at the moment. So who else can help us get there? And the delivery model that we originally looked at, and Avra will remember this in the housing plan, housing study back in 2019, was could we set up a community land trust? Could they take the site on and own the site and then sell it on to self-builders? And the work we did recently with the Housing Advisory Programme was to commission Cornwall Community Land Trust, who are an umbrella organisation, to establish whether we could get a community land trust set up just for the Isles of Scilly. It's been a long, slow, hard journey to try and do that, and what's become apparent is that could become a barrier to us progressing this site quickly. The self-builders that we engaged in way back 2 years ago in our public consultation exercise are saying, what's happening? You've bought the site, why aren't you selling us the plots? What's going on next? So what we've got to find is a way to be pragmatic and move the site forward at pace. The next step really is to say, well, is it likely we'll get a community land trust set up in time, and would they be in a position to go and get some funding to put the site plots up for sale, do the plot passports, get rid of all the planning conditions, get the reserve matters in, etc., etc. Highly unlikely. So what the Cornwall Community Land Trust have been asked to do is to investigate whether they might take it forward in that period before an Isles of Scilly Community Land Trust is set up. So the suggestion that's come forward from them is this is timely because of some of the funding available that we can't access as a council, but they can as a community-led organisation. So Cornwall Community Land Trust will be eligible to bid for some community housing funding, which will help us bridge the gap in terms of the site costs, in terms of putting in the site access, and in terms of putting those service plots in, because the money we've got doesn't bridge the gap quite. And they can take the site forward for us and take that developer risk. Because as a council, we haven't got that expertise. They have. They've built over 260 community-led homes in Cornwall, and we haven't. So this is an opportunity to de-risk it for the council, but ensure we still get the site delivered for our self-builders, of which we've got 46 at the moment. So the model here is that we approve the disposal of sites to the Cornwall Community Land Trust, subject to the appropriate due diligence, contracts, etc. And then we make sure that in the heads of terms, we retain some control over who gets those plots. How are they allocated? So we could just give it to the Cornwall Community Land Trust and then they allocate it. But we haven't got an allocations policy yet approved for self-builders. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to retain some control as a council? So recommendation, I can't remember which one it is. One of the recommendations relates to the need for us to make sure that we get the allocations within the heads of terms of this agreement so that the council agree who gets allocated those plots. So the policy will sit with the council for approval. The allocation of those plots will be down to a policy that we set as a council, and that will form part of the heads of terms of this agreement. So we retain that control. So really moving forward, it's about make sure we get the heads of terms right, make sure they deliver in a reasonable timescale, and you'll see in paragraphs, I'll set them out, I'm just going to page 267, the key heads of terms, 266 and 267 that we've set out already, but that's about, we've got planning permission, we need to get reserve matters in, those plots need to be released for sale, you need to build this site out within 2 years of those reserve matters been approved, and you need to allocate those plots in accordance with the policy that we've agreed with you. So those heads of terms are set out there, but they're the basic principles behind it, is we get someone else to do it on our behalf, they release the site, they gain as much money as possible, we maximise the amount of grant to keep the costs down for the self-builders to make it as affordable as possible, and then we move on through to the delivery stage, which they then take over from us. In a nutshell. Simple.
It's mostly about the money, but it's also about the expertise. You know, we've applied for that funding, hopefully we'll hit soon. And then, obviously, some more money, which all goes to make this self-build project more affordable for the it's just about expertise, as Nicola said, we've very much to do everything. The Community Land Trust, Community Land Trust have done this before, they know what they're doing. And we'll still keep control of the allocations that we're doing with that. So it's just trying to get the best fit to get it done as financially viable as possible and as time as everything's fixated, I know, really frustrating, but this is, in our opinion, this is the quickest way to get it delivered. So again, I'm happy to those
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful of time, but in brief, I totally agree we need a delivery partner. On page 259, it points out, this is going to be very resource heavy, and obviously we have limited resources. So I'm all in favour of that. Just like to point out that I hope, and I know, we're taking a lessons learned approach. I think we'd all agree that the Trench Lane Pilots Retreat project have left us with significant challenges when the houses are resold. And the main thing, I think, is to make sure that these are houses for local people in housing needs, and they should remain that way in perpetuity. How we achieve that may be quite a challenge, but I hope we can. And that it seems perfectly reasonable, which I think is suggested on page 267, that when a house is sold or at some point, the council recoups the cost of the variation of the cost, which I see is about 33 grand. Now, at what point we do that, I'm not sure, but I'm definitely sure we should at least be doing it when property is continued to repair. To try and deal with the problems before they happen. So, thank you.
I spent quite a long time reading this, and I was hoping to get a bit of comprehension, and because verbal statement, and I think I'm more confused now than I was before. It does strike me, certainly for Nicola and Russell, I think say it's akin to juggling eels getting this to get forward. So well done for getting it to this stage, and I support. I'm happy to second the recommendations. And regarding Fran's last statement, which I did notice, but I didn't take much notice of, I think, yeah, that's a good point. And we could also, perhaps recouping the land cost, make that conditional, have that sort of, I don't know, depending if it's local need it goes to. I.e. you could weight it somewhat to make it more viable. So that might be another bit of leverage we have there. But I'm happy to support the recommendations.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I think first and I totally agree. It's all quite creative pace now. Then Councillor Dean talks about the fact that we've only got one pretty much part-time member of staff. Would we see a correlation in increasing pace with the increased capacity? Internal capacity, that is. We talk about housing being an overarching strategic priority for the council. Then we have one part-time person juggling codes and housing.
I think in terms of delivering sites, it's quite a different skill set. You need a full development team to develop sites. I think in terms of creating the opportunity, if we've done this site and the other site, we've done the first part of our housing programme, which is create the opportunity for 30 affordable homes on the island. So between myself and Sean, we've done that job. The next bit is the challenge of further delivery, and we'll have a look at what resources we need to do that. But in terms of skill set, I think we've got the right team in-house if we're just enabling and facilitating. But if you want to deliver, you need a whole development team, and that's way beyond the cost that this council could afford.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
So, specifics really. So, in terms of heads of terms, part C talks about planning application, development becomes commercially unviable. Are we still retaining total planning control of the build? Yeah.
So basically, we retain our role as local planning authority. The site has outline consent for 12 homes. The next step would be to get reserved matters. If they find that they want to do a different scheme, it has to come back to the local planning authority, and you wear your local planning authority hat.
And reserved matters is
reserved matters is the details. So if you remember when we granted the outline planning permission, everything was agreed apart from the individual designs for each property, because that will be down to the self-builder. So we've agreed the site layout, the landscaping, all those other things. The individual house designs are down to the self-builders to put into a reserved matters application.
We purchased the land from the Duchy, and in the report you say that we purchased it because there was an agricultural cost, and the cost of development is negligible. And that's the same for pretty much most. The question is that the same for most land on the island? If you're developing a big site, so land is worthless for developing housing.
For affordable housing, you're going to, at the moment, our viability is always negative. So the land we buy is always going to be, we're having to grant fund it, basically bridging the gap between its value and its current use. So even agricultural value is greater than its value for affordable housing because
that's 60 grand, sorry, I'm jumping around. That's the money that we've spent. Can we recoup that in some way, or is someone built that?
Let me come back to that, because I think in the heads of terms, what's really important is part M, which is if anybody sells the property on into the future, what we should be able to do as a council have first dibs on buying it back at its value, and its value is as an affordable home. So that value, that cost of putting that infrastructure in, is reflected in its value as an affordable home moving forward. So, to me, the most important element of this is that we have the opportunity to buy those plots as they come forward into the future. So if somebody decides they're going to leave the island, they've built a self-built plot, it's got an affordability and perpetuity element to it anyway, that's reflected in its value, the council have the opportunity to buy it back. The benefit of what we've invested so far carries on in perpetuity because the value for them selling it is reflected in that obligation for it to be affordable. So we don't ever recruit that money back because in fact that's a grant. We're giving people a grant now to make it affordable. We're not doing market. You'd only recruit that back if you're doing market value selling it on forward. Does that make sense? So provided it's affordable in perpetuity, you don't recoup that money back. We've provided a grant, we're bridging the gap to make it affordable for people.
To make clear to the self-builders, this taxpayer, for the local taxpayer, those properties there are cheaper because of the money that the council tax put into them. It's all grants, the whole. And is that the same for the not wanting to be caught out in the future of the site maintenance as well? Because there will be roads there, there will be. Is it going to be community trust land, or is it going to be?
So in terms of the management of the site moving forward, the Self-Builds will buy the plots. The communal area will be either be a management company or a community land trust. They'll own the rest of the site. So they in effect have the foothold into the future management of that site, and they'll then have to charge the people using that site ground rent or whatever they call it. So it's a management cost for the future maintenance of the roads and the open spaces, the allotments. If you remember the layout, we've got little allotments in there as well. So there'll be a management company that runs that, be that a community land trust or a management company from the residents. No, we've got rid of that obligation.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder for the adoption of these recommendations. Could we have a vote, please? Those in favour?
Thank you.
Very much. The last item on our agenda, item 19, is the member roles and executives.
Chairman, it's very brief for me. You'll recall that the full council, I think, was a reset. I will report to you in terms of the member role. There was a amendment offered to for two roles. And following that debate, the recommendation was to leave those roles as they were originally suggested, with the caveat of full review further down the line. So I think the report today is for the lead member role for economy, transport, tourism, and lead member for climate change and environment to be so reported to today.
Are there any questions on that before I go to the first speaker?
I'd say we had a really good full discussion about the proposals and came to the conclusion that we'll see where we were in 6 months. So.
Could I have a proposal, please, for the lead member for environmental services and climate change? Councillor Mumford.
Thanks, both Councillor Watt.
Are there any other nominations, please, for that post? No. Could I go to the vote, please? Those in favour of that nomination? Thank you. That's unanimous. The second one is the lead member for economy, tourism and transport. Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Mumford again. Thank you. By Councillor Lane. Are there any other proposals, please? So could we go to the vote on that? All those in favour? Very much.
Again.
Environment